Hi guys, how old are you? I'd love to see the age range of our viewers. Write your age below.
I was sitting in my car, engine off, half-finished latte sweating in the cup holder, when I got the text. I wasn't expecting anything special that morning. Just another Tuesday. Just another board meeting at 9. But what I saw on my screen made the air in my chest freeze. It was a short message from my mom. "Hey, sweetie, just a heads up. We changed your reservation for the cruise. It's probably best if you sit this one out. We didn't want drama around your sister's baby. Hope you understand." Just like that. Like she was canceling a lunch reservation, not slicing a daughter out of a family tradition that I had paid for. I sat there for a long time, phone still glowing, eyes not really seeing anything. The words didn't make sense in my head. I read it again and again. Then I scrolled up through our texts, thinking maybe I missed something. Maybe I'd lashed out or picked a fight or did something that could explain this quiet little betrayal. But there was nothing, just a few passive check-ins from her, a picture of the cruise itinerary I had sent a few weeks ago, and a PayPal confirmation from when I covered the initial deposit for 5 cabins. That cruise wasn't just some random vacation. It was our family's tradition, going on 15 years. Every other summer, we'd pick a route, Caribbean, Mediterranean, Alaska once, and it was the one time I got to pretend we were a normal, loving bunch. My parents, my sister Emily and her husband. Sometimes some cousins. It was always chaotic, loud, too much food and not enough personal space. But I cherished it. I made time for it. I funded it, to be completely honest. My parents were retired. Emily was a part-time yoga instructor, married to a guy who still called his dad for gas money. And I was the only one with a stable 6-figure income and enough guilt to foot the bill. So you can imagine how it felt to be told, quietly, cleanly, like a polite rejection letter, that I wasn't welcome, not for anything I did, not for something I said, but because they didn't want drama around Emily, around her baby, like I was some kind of risk, a walking liability that could ruin their precious little moment. Here's the thing. I didn't cry. I didn't text back. I didn't even call. I just sat there and laughed. This bitter, hollow kind of laugh that scraped up from somewhere deep and cold. Because it wasn't just about the cruise. It never is, right? You don't bleed over one text. You bleed because that text proves what you've always suspected, what you've tried to ignore for decades. I've always been the extra, the backup daughter, the one they lean on when things fall apart, but never the one they choose. Emily was born when I was 10. I remember the day she came home from the hospital, tiny, wrinkled, screaming like she was allergic to the world. My parents were so obsessed with her, they forgot to pick me up from school 2 days in a row that week. I walked home both times. From then on, it was her show. Emily got away with everything. Broke curfew, she was exploring boundaries. Got a DUI in college? My parents blamed the officer for picking on a girl alone at night. Me? I got a C+ in calculus junior year and lost phone privileges for a month. But I swallowed it. I worked hard. I went to a state college, worked 2 jobs, graduated with no debt. I built a life. I started my own design firm and made something out of myself. And somewhere along the way, my success became their safety net. I paid off their mortgage when Dad had a health scare. I co-signed on Emily's first apartment when she and Tom eloped. I paid for that cruise, not just this year, but for the last 3. And now I was drama, a risk, an unwanted variable in their carefully curated little vacation. I finally exhaled, put the car in drive, and pulled into the parking lot of my office. My assistant waved at me from the lobby, but I just nodded and walked past her like I was floating. I went straight to my desk, pulled up my accounts, and started closing things down. Not everything, just the cards they had access to. The family card that paid for their groceries, the emergency travel card Dad used when he flew to Florida last winter, the Amazon account Mom shared with me and used like her personal department store. All of it shut off, revoked, frozen. There was no big speech, no confrontation, no warning, just like their text. By lunch, I was sitting in the break room, stirring soup I didn't want, and staring into space. One of my colleagues asked if I was okay, and I said, "Yeah, just tired." That's the lie women like me learn to tell early and often. Not angry, not hurt, just tired. It's more palatable, easier to ignore. I could already imagine how it would play out on their end. Emily would be the victim, again. Mom would wring her hands and wonder why I had to be so cold. Dad would probably just grunt and go back to mowing the lawn, pretending like the silence was my fault. They'd tell themselves I was punishing them for no reason, acting out like a child. But deep down, I think they knew. I think they'd always known this was coming. Because when you treat someone like an option long enough, don't be surprised when they stop treating you like a priority. And the best part? The cruise was still a week away. Let's just say that family vacation was going to get very interesting once the balance on those cabins came due. I didn't say a word, I just waited. 3 days passed before they came. I had started sleeping with my phone on silent, knowing full well the flood was coming and not wanting it to sneak into my rest like everything else they'd ever taken from me. For those 72 hours, there was blissful quiet. No messages from my mother, no apologies wrapped in condescension, no finger-wagging guilt texts from Emily or Dad's gruff, half-assed, "Can we just move on?" voicemails. Just silence. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd gotten the message. Maybe the weight of being cut off financially would make them reflect, make them reach out with something resembling actual humility or remorse. But of course not. That would require accountability, and my parents are allergic to that. So instead, they showed up at my office, uninvited, like it was the most natural thing in the world. I was mid-conference call with a client from Chicago, walking through the logistics of a luxury penthouse redesign, when my assistant, Rachel, poor girl, buzzed in and whispered that there was a couple in the lobby asking for me. "They said they're your parents," she added quietly, unsure if she should be amused or alarmed. I told her to give me 5 minutes and hung up the call early, told the client I had an emergency, which, in hindsight, was probably the most honest thing I said all week. When I walked into the lobby, there they were, Debbie and Carl, standing awkwardly near the water cooler, like they were visiting a middle school principal. My mother clutched a folder to her chest, the kind she used to bring to parent-teacher conferences when she wanted to seem prepared, but not desperate. My dad had that same fake neutral expression he always wore right before trying to manipulate someone into feeling sorry for him. I stood there for a moment, just watching them, letting the tension fill the room until Rachel decided she wanted no part of it and quietly stepped away. I didn't ask why they were there. I simply gestured to the glass conference room and said, "Let's talk in there." The door clicked shut behind us with a finality I hope they noticed. My mom launched into it first, all sugar-coated concern. "We didn't think it would upset you like this," she said, her voice doing that gentle rise at the end of every sentence, like I was a skittish dog about to bolt. "It wasn't about you. It was about keeping things peaceful. You know how emotional Emily gets now that she's pregnant. We just didn't want to risk upsetting her." I stared at her, refusing to give her anything. No nod, no frown, no verbal lifeline she could cling to, just silence. My father cleared his throat and added, "We figured you'd understand. You always do." And there it was, the oldest line in the book. I always understand. I always forgive. I always pick up the check, swallow the slight, move on for the sake of family harmony. I always, but not this time. "You know," I said slowly, each word deliberate, "it wasn't the disinvite that hurt the most. It was the fact that no one thought I even deserved a conversation." My voice didn't shake. It came out cold, steady. That was a choice. "You canceled my reservation on a cruise I paid for, without even bothering to talk to me. Then you sent me a 3-line text like I was some vendor you were ghosting." My mother opened her mouth, probably to start apologizing in that way she always did. Apologies filled with justifications and guilt pivots, but I held up my hand. "Don't," I said. "You can't spin this." Then came the slip. My father, who had been mostly quiet, muttered under his breath, "She always finds a way to ruin things." My mother stiffened next to him, eyes widening in that not now look. But I heard it. I heard it like a bell. I turned to him. Who were you talking about, me or Emily? He looked away, pretending like it hadn't happened, but it didn't matter. The truth was already out there, vibrating in the air between us. That's what they really thought. I wasn't just inconvenient. I was the saboteur, the family liability, the one who ruined things just by existing. I leaned back in my chair and let it all settle, let them squirm. Then, as calmly as I could manage, I said, I've taken care of this family for over a decade. I've paid your bills, covered your emergencies, given Emily loans she never paid back. And the one time I set a boundary, you act like I've declared war. Let me be clear, I didn't start this. You did, and you don't get to decide how I respond. My mother finally spoke, this time with something more real behind her voice. Panic, maybe. We just want to fix this family. But I cut her off again. This family? I asked, smiling a little. You mean the one I'm only a part of when it's convenient? When you need help moving or money or someone to play the villain so your golden child doesn't have to feel guilt? There was a long pause. My dad looked at the table. My mom looked like she might cry. But still, no apologies. No admission of wrongdoing. Just discomfort and shame dressed up as victimhood. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. I have to get back to work, I said. If you need help figuring out how to pay off the rest of the cruise, I suggest you talk to Emily, or maybe Tom. I'm sure they can dip into their baby shower fund. As I walked them out, my mother grabbed my arm gently. You don't mean to cut us out completely, do you? I looked at her, really looked at her, and said, I'm not cutting anyone out. I'm just finally letting you deal with the consequences of your choices. Something I've done for all of you for way too long. They left without saying another word. My assistant raised an eyebrow as they passed, but I didn't offer an explanation. There was nothing to explain. The line had been drawn. Not out of cruelty, not even out of anger, but out of exhaustion. And I'll be honest, part of me hoped that would be the end of it. That they'd lick their wounds, process the embarrassment, and maybe come back with something resembling accountability. But no, that's not how these things work. Because that night, I got a message from Emily, and that's when I knew this was far from over. That night, after the awkward parade of parental regret had marched itself out of my office, I went home and poured myself a glass of wine. That tasted more like vinegar than victory. There's a particular kind of bitterness that comes from finally standing up for yourself, only to feel like you're shouting into a void. I wasn't expecting a miracle. I wasn't expecting them to fall to their knees and beg for forgiveness or wire transfer back all the money I had spent on their lives. But some part of me, some worn-out sliver of the daughter they raised to always hope, wanted something human. Instead, I got silence for a few hours. Then Emily's message arrived. It was close to midnight, and I had just shut off the lights in my kitchen when my phone buzzed. I should have ignored it, should have left it to rot in the notifications until morning, but of course I didn't. Of course I looked. And there it was, her name, her little profile picture, a smiling selfie with Tom that made me want to gag. The message wasn't long, but it packed more poison than anything I'd seen come from her in years. I think it's best if we all move forward peacefully, especially with the baby coming. I hope you can respect our boundaries. I'm not scared of you anymore. That last line, that smug, passive-aggressive slap in the face disguised as spiritual growth. I read it again, and again, then I laughed. Not out loud, but one of those deep, internal, hysterical laughs that live in your stomach like gas. I'm not scared of you anymore. As if I'd ever threatened her. As if my entire existence had been a shadow cast over her perfect little life. That was the narrative she had spun for years. And now she was polishing it, gift-wrapping it for the next chapter of her curated victimhood. But the thing about narratives is they don't just appear out of nowhere. They're built. Brick by petty brick, over time, over family dinners, over whispered conversations behind closed doors. And this one, this I'm the dangerous one fairy tale, started 3 years ago, the night everything changed. It was Thanksgiving, The last one we hosted at my place. The last one before I learned the real shape of betrayal. Emily and Tom had flown in a day early, and the tension was already thick by the time the turkey hit the oven. She had that wide-eyed innocence she weaponized so well, fluttering around the kitchen pretending to help, while I tried to keep everything from boiling over. Somewhere between the mashed potatoes and the second bottle of wine, she pulled me aside and dropped the bomb. She had borrowed money in my name. Not asked me, not warned me. She had used my name to take out a loan. And it wasn't small, $30,000. She said it was a mistake, that she didn't think I'd notice, that she was going to fix it. And like a fool, I swallowed it. I told myself it was just a misstep, that family means forgiveness. I didn't want to ruin the holiday. Didn't want to make a scene. Didn't want to be that person. So I told her she had 6 months to pay me back, and I kept it to myself. I didn't tell our parents. I didn't tell Tom. I protected her. I protected the image of our happy little family. And she never paid me back. She barely even acknowledged it again. In fact, 3 months later, she had the nerve to hint that I'd gifted her the money. That I was helping her get on her feet because I didn't know what else to do with my money. It wasn't just a slap in the face. It was a calculated erasure of the truth. And my parents? When they eventually found out, they swept it under the rug like everything else she ever did. Because Emily was fragile. Emily was hormonal. Emily was the baby. That night, sitting in the dark of my apartment, her message glowing on my screen like a spark waiting to hit gasoline, I felt something inside me calcify. This wasn't just a family misunderstanding. This wasn't just emotional misalignment. This was war. And if Emily wanted to act like she wasn't scared of me, then maybe it was time to remind her why she should have been. I didn't respond to her message. I didn't start a fight or scream into the void or fire back with some performative clapback. Instead, I opened a folder I had kept in the cloud for years, one that contained every financial record, every email, every receipt, tied to that $30,000 mistake. I packaged it all up and sent it, not to her, not to my parents. I sent it to Tom. I didn't write a letter. I didn't explain. I let the numbers speak, the dates, the bank logs, the screenshots of her text messages asking for forgiveness, promising repayment, calling it temporary. It was all there, laid out like an indictment. If she wanted to play grown-up and pretend she'd healed, then she could face the consequences like 1, 2. The next morning, I checked. Emily's social media had gone dark. No inspirational baby bump posts. No "we're so blessed" captions. Radio silence. My mother didn't call. My father didn't text. But I knew the impact had landed. I could feel it in the quiet. That afternoon, Rachel handed me a small envelope that had been dropped off at reception. No name, just a note inside. My parents' cruise booking confirmation. Cancelled. The balance had defaulted. My mother had handwritten 2 words on the back of the document. How could you? I pinned it to the corkboard above my desk, next to a picture of me at my college graduation. The one they didn't bother attending because Emily had a dance recital. I wasn't proud of what I'd done, but I wasn't sorry either. And something told me this was only the beginning. There's a silence that doesn't bring peace, only pressure. It settles into your chest, spreads out behind your eyes, waits in your muscles. That's the kind of quiet I was living in the week after I sent Tom the folder. Not the good kind of quiet, not the kind where things are finally resolved and you can let your guard down, but the kind of silence that's only the calm before the explosion. And I knew it was coming, because people like Emily don't just take a hit like that and move on. No, they retreat, they regroup, and then they start rewriting the story before anyone else has a chance to tell it. I didn't hear from Tom directly, not even a message to confirm he'd seen the files, but I knew he had. 3 days after the email was sent, Emily's social media went dark. Just like I'd predicted. All the polished, carefully posed updates disappeared. The baby shower posts vanished. The gender reveal photo, yes, they'd popped a giant balloon filled with pink confetti on the beach like every other couple with too much time and a ring light, was gone. Suddenly, the timeline was empty. Just a single profile picture remained, cropped awkwardly, with Tom now noticeably absent. I waited. On day 4, my mother finally called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail, her voice trembling not with sadness or regret, but with something more venomous: embarrassment, humiliation. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she said, her tone clipped, rehearsed. "You've made a very serious mistake. Your sister is under a lot of stress, and now Tom is asking questions she can't answer. Why would you do this to us?" To us. That was the phrase that did it. Not to Emily, not to your sister, but to us, as if this betrayal was something I had inflicted on the whole family, some unnecessary wound I'd slashed open for no good reason. No one, not once, had said, "We didn't know," or "She shouldn't have done that," or even, "You were right." It was all about shame, about exposure, about the uncomfortable truth being dragged into the light without their permission. The next day I received an email from my father, a spreadsheet, a line-by-line accounting of what he claimed were expenses and gifts over the years, a half-baked attempt to balance the moral scales and make it seem like I was just a bitter daughter throwing a tantrum over some ancient misunderstanding. I scrolled through the document, reading lines like Christmas presents estimated at $2,000 and support during college, shared groceries. He was actually trying to quantify parenting, trying to argue that their emotional manipulation and financial reliance had somehow evened out in the long run. So I made my own spreadsheet. I stayed up late that night, pouring through bank statements, payment confirmations, loan agreements, and shared accounts. I documented every dollar I had ever spent on them, directly or indirectly. Mortgage payments when Dad had a health scare and no insurance. Emily's apartment lease for that 6-month phase, where she just needed space to find herself. The honeymoon cruise I paid for as a surprise gift, because she and Tom couldn't afford it but still insisted on a week in Bora Bora. Groceries, car repairs, emergency flights, gift cards, birthday parties, you name it, I found it. The total, $128,000. Not counting interest, not counting the emotional labor, not counting the birthdays I spent alone because Emily had a cold and Mom didn't want to split up the family. I sent it as a PDF, just like my father's, neat, labeled, cold. I didn't add a message. I didn't need to. The numbers said it all. The following morning, I got one sentence in reply. From my mother, just one. "We only took because we thought you owed us for what you did to your sister." That sentence didn't sting the way she probably wanted it to. It didn't pierce me like a dagger or unravel my resolve. What it did was confirm something I had long suspected, but never dared to say out loud. They hadn't just overlooked what Emily had done. They had justified it. They believed, somewhere deep in their tangled sense of fairness, that I deserved to be taken from, that I owed penance for being stronger, more stable, less easy to manipulate. They had twisted guilt into currency and spent it like it was theirs to use. I sat with that sentence for a long time. I read it over and over again. We thought you owed us. Not love, not support, but debt. They had turned my adulthood into repayment for the sins they believed I'd committed just by being unwilling to play the role they wrote for me. So I did the one thing I knew would cut the deepest. The one act of rebellion they wouldn't see coming because it didn't involve rage or revenge. It involved absence. I removed them from my emergency contacts. I removed them from the business line account I'd let them use for years. I deleted the shared family calendar where I used to schedule visits, doctor's appointments, and holiday reminders. I backed out of the family chat. Not dramatically, not with some big announcement. I just left, quietly, cleanly. That weekend, they held the baby shower. At least they tried to. Tom didn't show. And that's when Emily finally called me. I watched the phone ring for a full minute, her name flashing across the screen like a warning sign. And when it stopped, I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel powerful. I felt empty. Because revenge doesn't fill the space where love used to live. It doesn't stitch back the hole left by years of disappointment and manipulation. But it does remind you who you are. It reminds you that you're not crazy, that the things you remember really did happen, that your pain has weight. And sometimes that has to be enough. For now, it had been nearly 2 weeks since Emily's baby shower collapsed into a half-hosted farce of pastel tablecloths and unanswered questions. And during that time, the air around me had shifted. Not in any dramatic cinematic way. There was no sudden thunderstorm, no grand monologue, no shouting matches under heavy rain, but in the small, persistent ways that you only notice when you've lived your entire life waiting for the next slap wrapped in a smile. The quiet had changed. It was heavier now, not the charged, anticipatory kind from before, but something that pressed down like the end of a long argument where both sides know nothing will ever really be resolved. I kept waiting for something more, another outburst, another accusation, maybe even a desperate olive branch disguised as a guilt trip. But instead, all I got was an eerie stillness. And then they showed up again. This time, it wasn't my office. They didn't risk walking into my space after the last fiasco, probably too embarrassed by the memory of Rachel, awkwardly witnessing their unraveling pride. No, this time they came to my building lobby on a Sunday afternoon, the one day I usually reserved for laundry, leftover takeout, and pretending to read something meaningful while mostly scrolling through articles I'd never finish. I had just come down to grab a package when I saw them. Debbie and Carl standing near the security desk, like ghosts who couldn't quite accept they weren't welcome anymore. My mother had dressed in her version of penance, no makeup, slightly wrinkled sweater, hair pulled back in a way that signaled she wanted to look humble, though she had probably rehearsed the outfit in front of her mirror for half an hour. My father looked tired, but not in the way people do after reflection. He looked like someone who had been up all night reworking a story, until it sounded just sympathetic enough to pass. I considered turning around and pretending I didn't see them. I imagined walking back up to my apartment, ordering a coffee I didn't need, and spending the next 3 hours rewatching some old movie just to avoid having to stand across from them and pretend we were still part of the same family. But something stopped me, curiosity maybe, or the simple human urge to hear what the people who hurt you the most might finally say when they realize you don't owe them anything anymore. So I walked over. I didn't smile. I didn't hug them. I just crossed my arms and said, "This isn't the time or place." My mother's eyes filled with tears instantly, like they'd been waiting there on standby, ready to deploy. "We didn't know where else to go," she said, her voice hoarse, as if emotion could make her case more compelling. "Emily's not speaking to us. Tom's gone. She's a mess. We never thought it would get this bad." I looked at her and said nothing. She kept going. "She needs her sister. You both need to talk. This isn't healthy for anyone. You don't understand what it's like watching your daughters fall apart and not being able to fix it." That was the moment. The one where I realized they hadn't changed. Not really. Because even now, standing there in the ruins of the very mess they had helped build, they still believed their role was to fix things, not own them. It wasn't about apologizing. It was about control, about restoring balance in the way that best protected their comfort. I asked her a simple question. "What exactly do you want from me?" She blinked, caught off guard by the directness. My father spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly, stripped of his usual arrogance. "We want you to come home. The baby's coming. And whether you like it or not, that child is your family." I felt the words roll over me, not in the way a meaningful statement does, but like a familiar lie I'd heard so many times it barely registered. "You want me there," I said slowly, "not because you value me, but because you want to look whole again. You want the photo. You want to pretend." My mother shook her head. "That's not fair." "No," I replied. "What's not fair is expecting someone to keep showing up to a family that only calls them a member when it's convenient. You disinvited me. You erased me. Then you asked for money. Then you begged for silence. And now that the fallout's caught up to you, you want to talk about healing." My father, in a rare moment of clarity, or perhaps simple desperation, looked me in the eye and asked, "Is there anything we can do?" It was a trap of a question, one designed to make me the gatekeeper, the cold daughter who refused to forgive. But I didn't take the bait. I just stepped back, created a few feet of space between us that felt metaphorical as much as physical, and I said something I had never dared say before. What happens when she turns on you too? They stared at me like I'd struck them, but I didn't mean it as an insult. I meant it as a warning. Because if there was one thing I knew about Emily, one thing that had become crystal clear in the years of watching her rewrite history with a trembling lip and a well-timed sob, it was that her loyalty was a currency, and the moment you stopped paying the premium, she moved on to someone who would. That was the truth they didn't want to see, that the daughter they'd spent a lifetime protecting wasn't fragile. She was strategic, and their turn was coming. Because when people build an entire identity around being the one who's wronged, they eventually need new villains to keep the story going. I didn't wait for a reply. I turned, walked back toward the elevator, and left them standing there, surrounded by the sterile chill of the lobby. As the doors closed, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt done. But even then, as I stood in the quiet hum of that elevator, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd done the right thing. That's the problem with revenge, especially the slow, calculated kind. It never really brings closure. It brings clarity, sure. It brings power, maybe. But it doesn't soothe the wound. It just changes who's holding the knife. So no, I didn't burn the bridge. That would imply I had power I never asked for. They lit the match long ago, every time they chose convenience over truth, appearance over love, Emily over me. All I did was stop trying to cross a bridge that had already crumbled. The story doesn't end with reconciliation. There's no hug, no tears, no whispered forgiveness. There's just distance. And sometimes that's all a person can give.